Welcome to the Wellness Behind and Beyond Bars. I am your host, Roxmary Mendez, and I am a student at the University of Houston downtown, currently studying health and behavioral science. Today, I am joined by Dr. Krista Gehring, a professor at the College of Public Service at the University of Houston downtown. Her academic work focuses specifically on incarcerated women, and together we'll be exploring the topic of wellness for incarcerated women and post-incarcerated women. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Gehring. It's truly a privilege to have you here today.
Thank you. I appreciate you asking me. This is very kind of you.
So before we begin, I'd like our listeners to have a quick overview of what we'll be discussing in this episode. Wellness is multidimensional. It's a concept that goes beyond just physical or mental health. It includes emotional, social, and even spiritual aspects of our lives and our daily involvement. For incarcerated women, wellness is shaped by the unique challenges that they face, such as the prison environment that they live in, the obstacles that they face re-entering a fast-paced society, the stigma that comes around incarceration or even criminal records, and the systemic barriers that limit them from accessing certain resources once they are out. In this conversation with Dr. Gehring, we'll be considering how wellness is both a personal journey and also a community responsibility for these women. We'll also explore how the resilience and support of a network plays a role in shaping the lives into positive and successful stories and outcomes for these women as they transition back into society. So let's begin. To start off, can you tell me, Dr. Gray, about what you do in your academia and the focus of your work with incarcerated women?
Sure, I would love to. So I've been at UHD for about 15 years now. And before I came to UHD, I was doing my doctoral studies at the University of Cincinnati. And the University of Cincinnati was unique in that it had a lot of faculty members that were very interested in offender rehabilitation and how can we effectively change behavior by incorporating, it's called the risk need responsivity principles, and using those things in order to implement programs, target the correct people. And I thought that that was really interesting, and yet there was something missing. And fortunately, I had a professor there, Patricia Van Boris, who was very much starting to get into the gender responsive sort of movement in corrections. For the past several decades, women were coming into the criminal justice system at a higher percentage than their male counterparts. So a lot of times these criminal justice agencies that had been sort of working with a dominantly male population all of a sudden had all of these females. And I think they realized, like, we can't just add women and stir. Like, these women are different, they have different issues. We need to start talking about how we can best serve this population. So Pat Van Boris worked with the National Institute of Corrections in developing a gender responsive risk needs assessment instrument that really tapped into all of those different unique needs that women have. And I was fortunate enough to be her student. So I was able to learn about the instrument. I wrote the curriculum for the training. I would go out and like train criminal justice professionals all over the country. And then when I came to the University of Houston downtown, I sort of continued that work, not in the capacity that I did as a student because I, had my own job, but, doing research. I still go and do trainings, whether it's, in person or virtually. I just finished up sort of a major validation study for the state of Oregon to see if this, we call it the WRNA, the Women's Risk Needs Assessment, if it was valid for women on pre-release, meaning that they were going into the community after prison, women who are in post-prison supervision, and women on probation. So it's really sort of been like one of the foundations of research that I do is this, what are these issues that women have? How can we better serve them? What does it come from initially? And, that's sort of one of the areas of research that I do now.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you so much for sharing. And it's kind of like I had said earlier before we started recording, that there's some things in society that you just don't know until you're introduced to them, right? And I think kind of like how you said, like you see that realizing, hey, there's a part missing, there's something else, there's more research that needs to be done. We need to assess, more of like what's actually going on in society, what things are affecting each woman. So I think research is really what happens behind the scenes and what shapes the world. Without research, I mean, where would our development, where would our social development be?
Well, you would hope that things are shaped by research. Sometimes
Yeah.
people sometimes people want to ignore research, but luckily there's been a whole movement of evidence-based practices in the criminal justice system that a lot of agencies are very much, we need to implement things that research says are effective, because if you just implement something that you think sounds good, or, oh, it worked for me, it's got to work for them, you're
Mhm.
ultimately doing harm, right? Because you're wasting resources and you're not targeting the things that are linked to recidivism, and you're putting the public in, harm's way by doing that.
Yeah. And if the knowledge is there, why not implement it, right?
Exactly, right.
Well, since your focus is specifically on this area with incarcerated women, I'd love to start with just the big picture of wellness itself. So, this next question is, how would you define wellness specifically within the context of incarcerated and post incarcerated women?
Oh gosh. I think the way that I sort of view wellness, because mind you, this is not my area of expertise, wellness. I mean, that's Dr. Henny.
Yeah.
But for me, it seems like wellness should be that you have the ability to sort of live your best self, that
Mm-hmm.
you have resources or access to resources or support, or even sort of like the internal motivation to want to be happy and healthy, and you're able to actually do that. Because sometimes I feel like, and this is just my sort of, pseudo educated, whatever view about wellness, I think a lot of times wellness and self care can often be practiced from a place of privilege. Does that make sense? Because you have the resources, you have access to things that allow you to do whatever. Like today, I went to the chiropractor, and then I went and I got some facial stuff done. And then it's like, but I have the resources to do that, to make myself feel better and to sort of have agency and all of this sort of things, where I think there are some individuals who would like to do that, and not just the, physical maintenance or whatever. I think to even have the resources to have the time to do that, and the privilege to do that, whereas some people do not have that. They're just trying to like live their life and stay above water and, do those sorts of things. So that's sort of how I see wellness. But again, I'm looking at it from a very different lens, I think, of like, obviously how I personally have practiced it. I haven't necessarily read a lot about it, so I will be the first person to ignore sort of my, or to to claim ignorance about a lot of it. I mean, let me ask you, like, how do you define wellness, or how is it talked about in your class?
I think like the biggest thing with wellness is most of the time people automatically think wellness is being physically fit, eating right, mental health, like, oh, okay, I don't have depression, I don't have anxiety, I'm top tier healthy, but I think very similar to how you said, there's a lot of individuals who wellness is shaped in different ways. Like an example is these incarcerated women. I mean, health and wellness is so much more than physically being healthy or mentally being healthy, because to these women, it's wellness is tied to safety, whether they feel safe, whether they are in a place of comfort, whether they're able to sleep, and not have to worry about certain things.
Right.
It's tied to dignity, their pride. What things do they lose when they're in the system? How they're treated, how this affects them, and also the support around them. And support, I think, is one of the broadest wellness topics that most people kind of just throw around. But that's, as human beings, our community is so important to us. When you're surrounded, whether by the right people or the wrong people, they always have an effect, right, in your life. And so, for in the topic of these women, having good support and good network is so crucial for them being able to experience positive outcomes. Wellness, definitely, in health, is one of the broadest. I think there's so many aspects of wellness, and just like you said, there's so many limitations that come with wellness as well. What like access to certain things, even just the like back to community, being able to have those people around you, because there's lots of people who don't have a community, who don't have a network, to support them. And then there's also just the fact that wellness is like a domino effect. You are struggling mentally, your body is also going to be affected by that. If you're
Right.
struggling physically, your mental health is going to be affected by that. So I think, just like you said, wellness is has different um, parts, and that all work together, as human beings, because we're so complex. So there is absolutely no way it would just be one form of wellness. I like that you pointed that out, just socially, who has certain, access to certain privileges versus those who don't. And I think that's a good perspective to start off with.
It made, if you don't mind, like before I forget, but when you're talking about community and connection, one thing that I will say about women who are incarcerated in particular,
Mhm.
a lot of times female prisons, there's not very many in a state. For example, in California, you know how big that state is. There's only 3 women's prisons in the entire state.
Wow.
So a lot of times, I mean, it's not to say that there aren't maybe some little whatever, but I've
Yeah.
been to 2 of the 3 of them, right? And 2 of them are actually across the street from each other. So they're very far away from friends, family. I mean, you'll see this a lot of times with incarcerated women where visitation day is not very busy
Hmm.
because it's difficult for their friends and families to get to the actual prison, or they're often just forgotten. And you have women who have children that they're not able to see their children. Like when I lived in Ohio, the women's prison, it was the Ohio Reformatory for Women, was in Cleveland, which was in the north part of the state. Well, if you're from Cincinnati, you're going to have to drive 5 hours to go up there. So it's very difficult for women a lot of times to maintain those strong connections. And that can also lead to just, you miss your kids, you miss your family, nobody's coming to see you. Like, how will that make you feel? So a lot of times within prison, they create these, I don't like this word, but they call it pseudo families, where women have relationships with one another that are very like a family. They refer to somebody as a mother or a father, or this is my daughter, this is my niece. And a lot of the way that women do time is through connections, through relationships, whether it's that sort of pseudo family relationship or with romantic relationships. So it's very important to have that connection. And it's like they're trying to do this in an environment that is so fabricated and it's not real. Like a prison is not reality, it's not how the real world is. So they're trying to create a life for themselves in this environment that is very strange. Do you know what I'm saying?
That's yeah, that's it it really does feel sad. I guess you feel for them, right? Like, and it does make you, I mean, at least for me, it makes me think, if I were to put myself in those shoes, it's that longing, to want to have family, that longing to want to have connections. And actually that kind of leads into the next question, which is that, so what are some of the biggest challenges that women face while trying to maintain their wellness during incarceration? And like you said, like creating these families, finding ways to cope with what they're going through. Like you said, it is really sad to think that a lot of these women are forgotten or don't get to see their children or don't get to see their families. And especially those who I'm assuming had a life outside, and are now living a different in a different society, basically, in prison. Um,
Right.
so, are there any other challenges or ways, I guess, that they kind of maneuver around these challenges that they face in prison?
I think I think we're starting to really understand how trauma has affected a lot of these individuals, and trying to make these environments a bit more trauma informed and trauma responsive. Because one thing about prison is that that environment can be very triggering for
Yeah.
somebody who has trauma in her background, right? There's no privacy. People are yelling, people are fighting, there's strip searches, there's, all of these sorts of things. And if programs were implemented within prisons that actually address trauma, because a lot of times these women don't know what this is. They just know that something happened and now they feel a certain way and they explode or they withdraw. So I think having that sort of awareness regarding trauma, not only for the women, but also for the staff in there, can really sort of help this self discovery. Because when you dig down to the root of it, when you have women who come into the system that have substance abuse problems, they're in terrible relationships, they have mental health problems, they have issues with parenting or whatever, I guarantee you, if you pulled it all back, you'll find a kernel of, well, maybe not even a kernel, a boulder of trauma that happened to them
Yeah.
in their lifetime. The majority of women who are in prison have some sort of sexual trauma, physical abuse, neglect. And I'm not saying that everybody who experiences abuse is going to go to prison or commit crime. Obviously, that's not what happens. But if you experience that and you don't have support system or resources, or like, hey, what happened to you? Let's get you some help, and you are, self-medicating with drugs and alcohol, or you are, getting into relationships that look like the relationships in your home, I think what can be really helpful in regards to wellness is for these women to really start talking about this trauma and recognizing that that's what it actually is, and that it's not, not everybody goes through this, and this is something that can be linked to maybe a lot of the behaviors that they engage in, maybe a lot of the thoughts that they have about themselves. So I think that's something that would be extremely important to do, especially in an environment like prison, to just sort of like help with that self discovery and find some answers. Because once you have that, I think it can be very empowering. I think a lot of times when people have been traumatized and they're not connecting the dots between, this traumatic event and these other sort of like not so great, maybe maladaptive behaviors, when they can connect it and be like, oh, this is why this happens. Now I have an explanation. Now I can maybe start working on some things to address this. I think that's something that would be really helpful.
Yeah. The a question kind of not in my notes, but it just kind of came to me. There's that, I guess, juxtaposition where you have you're trying to make this program for women to feel safe and share their stories and share their traumas and find the root cause of, why they're struggling in a place where they don't feel safe. I wouldn't put, safety and prison together, like I guess from the outside looking in, like have you seen these programs be successful?
Well, I think to your point, I think in general, the public, because what happens in prison is so behind closed doors that you are assuming that it's dangerous and it's not safe.
Mm-hmm.
And that may or may not be the case. It depends on the institution. I've been to a lot of women's prisons where it's like a college campus. Everybody's just walking around doing their thing. Um, I went to a prison in Oregon where they had in the middle of the prison kind of this huge room where all of the women had cubicles. It was like an office, like an open office. And they all had like phones, like speaker headsets. And it turned out that everyone in the state of Oregon, whenever they called the DMV, they were getting the women in the prison answering the phone and answering their questions and doing all of this stuff. So I caution you to think that because women's prisons and men's prisons are very different. I would say men's prisons are comparatively more dangerous. They tend to do time a little different. They tend to have gangs. They tend to have a very complex underground economy. Women's prisons, it's not to say that there isn't any sort of danger or violence. I mean, obviously, but it's not to the extent that men's prisons are. That sort of thing, not to say that, when somebody walks into a women's prison, they're not going to feel, you know, a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there are some prisons that are really trying to change the environment, allow these women to feel more empowered and more agency, and actually have these programs in there that make them feel comfortable talking about these things and address these things. Like, for example, there's a program called Moving On. It was created by Marilyn Van Deeten, and it's sort of it's a cognitive behavioral program, but it also takes into account like the unique needs that women have, particularly in regards to relationships, because a lot of times women get in trouble when they get with like a criminal partner, because they will commit crime in order to sort of maintain that relationship, even though they may not want to. And then when you tell them, well, you should just be in a healthy relationship, they don't know what that looks like. So this is a program that sort of goes through and dissects what sort of unhealthy relationships look like. These are what healthy relationships look like. Let's also work on sort of your own ideas about yourself and connections and communication. So you really need to have a prison. And what I mean by that, I mean the administration, the leadership needs to really be on board and believe that these programs are important and
Right.
that women need these programs. That's how they're going to succeed. Otherwise, they're not going to care. They're just going to have whoever comes in and volunteers to do a prison or do a program. And that could be anything. You'll see a lot of yoga classes in prison. And don't get me wrong, like, great, meditate, stretch it out, whatever. But that's not a program that's going to target risk factors for criminal behavior. It actually might help a little bit with wellness,
Hmm.
but it's not going to target the trauma, the mental illness, the substance abuse in a way that's really going to stick. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. And I think that like how I had said, it's all a domino effect.
It
If
is.
if you're struggling mentally and you don't get to the root of the issue, then you're always going to come around. And it's kind of like when people say, you make a mistake and you learn from it. Well, if you don't know where the mistake happened, or how you found yourself in a situation, then how are you expected to learn from it? Are there any other programs other than the ones you just mentioned that you feel help these women get a better sense of wellness while being in prison, or even post incarceration?
Well, I do know of a few programs that have been created and implemented in prison. Stephanie Covington does a lot of different programs that are specifically tailored to women. One is called Helping Women Recover. Another is called Beyond Trauma. I think another she created called Beyond Anger, because that's a lot of when you've been traumatized and you're not self-medicating and you're having to like sit with things, anger is often something that comes out for a lot of individuals. So that's really good. Another standard that's sort of used all the time is seeking safety, which is a substance abuse, PTSD sort of thing. So the good thing is trying to get at these things, because if you don't get at the root, I mean, I'm sure you've heard of people who've been in and out of rehab, in and out of rehab, in and out, they go to AA, they fall off the wagon. And it's because you're not getting at the root of what is causing the substance abuse. So when you just say, just stop drinking or just stop using, which a lot of these abstinent sort of programs do, well, oftentimes that addic- addictive behavior transfers to something else, where they're like smoking like a chimney and maybe gambling or going shopping or whatever. And it's like, you can't just stop. You have to put something in place to deal with that root cause. So a lot of those programs that are specifically sort of tailored with women in mind, and those sort of unique issues and needs that we struggle with,
Mhm.
are going to be a bit more effective than some that just sort of rubber stamp, let's do this. And it's not to say that they're not, I'm sorry, I take that back. It's not that they're not effective. I don't want to say that like a cognitive behavioral program isn't going to be effective for women. It certainly is. But if you also combine it with something that is tailored a bit more to their unique needs and pathways into the criminal justice system, you're going to be a bit more successful, I think.
These programs are obviously meant to help these women. So what skills do these women develop, or what skills do they build when they are a part of these programs?
Oh, I think it depends on the kind of programs that they're in. But I think let's say you're in a program like Beyond Trauma, and it would teach the women to realize sort of what happens when they become re-traumatized or triggered, what their trigger is, how to pay attention to what physically happens in their body to sort of give them a clue like, something is going on. And then sort of teach them how to cope with things differently. Instead of exploding and going off, like maybe count to 5, deep breathing, let's talk about it, go to another sort of area so that they can regulate their system again, and sort of, instead of having an explosive episode in prison may lead to a getting written up for misconduct, right? So those are sorts of things that teaching these coping skills is very important. I think a lot of things that like you and I take for granted, where I don't think we could point to a day or an age where we learned how to make good decisions, or how we can solve problems, or what a good relationship looks like to a bad relationship, or a good friend to a bad friend. So it's teaching a lot of these skills that may seem like rudimentary to some, but because these individuals don't have those skills, they weren't taught, or maybe people were modeling like really terrible behavior, whatever, and that's how they learned. That's something that's really important, is teaching these skills so that they can go out into the world and make pro-social decisions and engage in pro-social behavior, and behavior that is not abusive to themselves. Because I think that that might be something that goes on too, that we have sort of this belief that, well, I can't do anything, nobody cares about me, I don't have any skills, nobody's going to hire me, I only know how to do, selling drugs or whatever. So it's also building and empowering that sense of agency and control for them is also important as well. And then, other programs that help, especially when we're getting into the reentry stages. You want to connect women to contacts outside of the prison. So when they leave, they can be successful. A lot of times prisons just say, oh, here are your possessions that you brought in. Here's a bus ticket. Peace out. Good luck. And depending on how long she's been in prison, she may not have people to go back to. She may not be able to get a job because she has felony on her record. She may not qualify for a lot of government assistance. So making things a bit more easier for individuals who are leaving prison, I think, is something that is important, but unfortunately, our society, we are not at that place right now. It's like you're punished in prison. And when you leave prison, that's when that punishment should stop, but it doesn't. It continues when you're in society because of the label you have, because of the connections that you've lost, because of, all of these barriers that are put into place. And then as a society, we get so mad when these people go back to prison. And I want to be like, what did you expect? You didn't give them anything to help them succeed once they left that institution. So I think that that's something that we really need to focus on in this country, is building up a really good sort of reentry process and system so that when people leave, they have stable ground to walk on and connections to not only, friends, family, whatever, but also connections to like community services, that they can navigate easily so that they have that support when they're in the community.
Yeah. And I mean, I can only imagine us, right? Like trying to find a new job, trying to find a new home or re-enter, like, or at least for me, whenever I turned 18, having to go and learn to be independent, right? It it takes a toll on us, and I can't even imagine, plus like adding on the weight of the stigma that comes with them as they exit, incarceration. And that kind of leads me to my next question, which is how does how do you think stigma specifically affects women's ability to achieve well-being after incarceration?
Oh, it makes me think of, when you say the word stigma and the things that we just talked about, it makes me think of sort of the self-fulfilling prophecy of, well, I'm labeled a criminal, I might as well just behave like one, right? Like nobody's going to help me. I don't have any resources. My family has abandoned me. I can't get a job. I don't see my kids. Like and everybody is looking at me like I have the plague because I'm a criminal and I just got out of prison. So, I mean, I think that's something that's really detrimental. That when somebody commits a crime, we put them away for a while, and then when they get out, we're not like, oh, hey, come back into the community, come back into society. There's a process that John Braithwaite talks about called um, reintegrative shaming. We tend to not do that. We tend to shame people and like banish them, and you are the bad person. Whereas reintegrative shaming is like, hey, what you did was bad. You need to be punished, but once you're done, we're going to bring you back into the community as a member again. We don't do that at all. So it's just this sort of like self-fulfilling prophecy, especially if somebody accepts that label and that stigma and like, well, I just can't do anything else. I might as well just commit another crime and go back because I can't make it out here. There's nothing for me. And then, I think that's something that when you're talking about returns to prison, a lot of returns to prison are not people committing new crimes. They're getting revoked for like technical violations that they've done something stupid, or they got fired from their job, or they lost their apartment or whatever. Back to prison. It's like, what do we expect? It's like we set people up to fail, and there's really not a lot of help in that. Not for all prisons. There are some prisons that have great reentry programs, but a lot of times, even with that, you still have this sort of stigma that you carry around, that you have to check that box. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? And that's something that makes it very difficult to navigate through society where you and I don't even have an issue. You know what I mean?
And yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is having to constantly be reminded of that. That's it becomes a part of your identity. It's like you feel like you can't walk around without having that almost like as a label, like, hello, my name
Yep.
is,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a felon. I've been to prison. And it kind of reaches that point where I believe it does affect mental health because now you have an identity crisis. You're no longer, oh, hello, my name is Roxmary Mendez. Hello, I'm a felon. Hey, I'm not worthy of being here in society. And it takes that toll, like bringing down people's confidence, I'm sure, affecting their self-worth, the way that they see themselves. And it's kind of how you had mentioned earlier, how there's certain things that we take for granted, like, just being able to know, like we said, what a healthy relationship looks like, being able to have, the knowledge to make good and bad decisions and understand that those decisions come with consequences. And even in those things, I'm sure that people who carry this stigma, um, they kind of reflect on that. It's like, oh, well, you don't have to think this way. You've never had to think that way, but I did. And I carry that around every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I can only imagine how much of a weight that is. To have to carry that as a part of your identity.
Yeah, for sure.
I wanted to ask you, like, what role do you feel community programs and organizations that involve helping or supporting these women on their wellness journey after they've been released? Like, what role do they play just in the wellness of these women, and the way that they develop into this new society after, being released from prison?
Well, I think that in a perfect world, if we had all the resources, if we had all of the manpower, if we had everything,
Mm-hmm.
being able to implement programs like that to help, not only women, but also just anyone who's getting out of prison. I think ultimately that would benefit society as a whole, right? Not just those women, but I mean, those women have children, they have families, they have loved ones, they encounter people like you and I every day, and if we can sort of have programs, whatever they may be, whether it's, something that helps them get a better education, or something that helps them learn a trade, or something that helps them learn to be a better parent, or whatever, like those types of programs, investing in these individuals would only have sort of a ripple effect on the rest of us, right?
Right.
That these individuals would really sort of see their worth and maybe move into a different area of their life where they don't feel like criminal behavior or antisocial behavior is really what they want to do anymore, because they've had these sort of needs addressed. So I think it's really important to invest in those types of programs, but it's difficult, especially when you have women returning to more rural areas where there's not a lot of resources or not a lot of programs in those areas, or other types of obstacles that can keep community programs, whether it's grants or other types of fundings or volunteer, whatever. So there's a lot of sort of pieces to the puzzle.
Right.
I like to think of it in terms of a perfect world, because I think that it would be beneficial to them, especially if you're talking about like their wellness journey. I think we have quite a ways to go when it comes to what the community is actually doing for these
Yeah.
women.
Yeah. And it makes me think, there's some women who have been in prison maybe most of their lives, and how does that also, affect the way that they receive certain resources? Because it's like they could have gone in, maybe early 90s, late 80s, and then now it's like our society is completely different. Everything revolves around this, our phones.
Right. It's like they stepped into the Jetsons. I don't know if you know that reference, but okay. That's a cartoon I used to watch growing up. I'm like, oh, I don't know if she knows what I'm talking about. But yeah, it's like they just stepped out of a time machine.
Right. Yeah.
And that on top of everything else, you have this sort of like digital literacy problem, which can impact, getting a job, the skills that you have, because a lot of the skills and a lot of the jobs that we have now that are sort of moving towards technology based, not necessarily like service based. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I was actually talking about that. Oh, I think I was talking to my students about that Monday night, because we were talking about leaving prison. And if you've been, there was a woman who got out of prison after being in prison for like 52 years. Like she went in when she was 19. And she's out, and she's like, in her 70s, right? Math is hard. Anyway, like, can you imagine? Like she committed her crime in 1968, and that's when she went in, and she's out now. What is she doing? I mean, she's just probably like, what is all of this stuff?
I can only imagine. Yeah.
Everything's different. So that's another thing too. You're right. If people, because we are very much we're going to sentence people to prison, and we're going to sentence them for a very long time. And because we're tough on crime, and I watched a film the other day, and it was talking about prison, and that we need to, instead of locking up people that we are pissed off at, we need to lock up people that we're afraid of. So, I mean, think about that. It's like, how many people Are we putting in prison because we're upset with them that they did this and we need to teach them a lesson, as opposed to the people that are like, oh, this one is, they need to be behind bars because they are dangerous. You know what I mean?
I feel like that just it just adds on,
It
to
does.
the barriers that these women and just in general that these people face. And another thought I'd like to share with you is you kind of mentioned these women and their families and how they're affected. And I wanted to ask you, are there programs like family based programs for these women? Because I just kind of think of an example is I think of bullying, right? Like that kid is struggling, in school. It's like because oh, my friends found out my mom was in prison and now I get bullied, is there anything I guess specific towards these women and their families?
Well, I mean, the only thing that it's like two two areas on the spectrum. Like one is there are some prisons that, sometimes you have women coming into prison who are pregnant
Mm-hmm.
and they have their child in prison, and then the prison has sort of created an area where the woman can live with her child
Mm-hmm.
and keep her child for, I don't want to say like a long time, but we know that attachment between the child and the mother in those very beginning years is so important. So
Right.
to have a prison that sort of fosters that connection, I think is really phenomenal. Now, some people will be like, but the kid is growing up in prison. Yeah, but he's with or she's with their mom, like the opposite is the child being farmed around to either foster care or other relatives or whatever. So that's something that some prisons have implemented. I think when the woman gets out of prison, there are like family unification type programs. But it's difficult, right? Because the child has been away from the mother for however long, living with maybe grandma or aunt or foster care or whatever. And now the mom comes back in and tries to be a mom. And that's difficult because she hasn't been there and the child may be angry, upset, scared, whatever. So I think that there are definitely some gaps in that in regards to how do we navigate the fact that in our country, women, I'm sorry, they're the primary caregivers. I realize that there's a bunch of fathers out there, but when it comes to child rearing, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times the mother is the one doing the heavy lifting. And when
Yeah.
she's removed, you have this child who there's an obvious gap,
Mm-hmm.
and that's going to cause issues for the child's development, their mental health, their wellness. So that's something that, we don't talk about or necessarily think about all of the collateral damage that happens when we send one person away to prison, because that person has a family, has friends, has whoever, and that affects their entire sort of social circle too, including the children. So that's something that I think we need to focus on a bit better as to how to really support these children whose family members, particularly mothers, have been sent away for a long time. And it's likely that that child hasn't been able to see her very often.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe creating situations where women can be closer to their families while they, serve time, as opposed to I have to drive 5 hours across the state. Just these sort of little things that are huge. If we make those adjustments, I think it would be really impactful when it comes to, that situation with their families.
In regards to changes, looking ahead, what changes in policy or in public attitudes do you think would be the most important to support these women after incarceration?
Again, in a perfect world,
Mhm.
um, looking at these women like they're human beings that, to be honest, a lot of times the difference between you and I and these women who went to prison is that they made a mistake, they got caught. Because
Mhm.
a lot of women, they're not in prison for violent offenses. They're in prison because they're there for either drug crimes or drug related crimes. And
Mhm.
why are they doing drugs? Well, let's go back to the like mental health trauma, all this sort of stuff.
Yes.
It's not to say that women aren't there for violence, but oftentimes their violence has been perpetrated against someone they know. It's been an abusive relationship and she's snapped, or she's gotten angry and assaulted somebody because of, again, that sort of thing. So I think as a society, we need to, it reminds me of a long time ago when I was maybe your age. I was at the University of Colorado doing my undergrad, and I went to go listen to Sister Helen Prejean speak. And she, if you don't know who she is the little nun who wrote Dead Man Walking. She got very involved in, capital punishment and the death penalty. And
Mhm.
I remember her saying, in this country, we recycle aluminum cans, but we don't recycle people. And to me, I was like, oh my God, like it's the truth. We
Yeah.
throw we throw people away. And when they come out of that trash compactor or whatever you want to call it, we still look at them like trash and treat them that way.
Mhm.
And the majority of people in prison are going to get out. They're going to get out. And what can we do as a society to help them succeed when they get out so that not only do we not look at them like trash, but they don't feel like trash?
Right.
I think that that's something that is going to take a huge shift in mindset. But to me, I think that that's one of the major things that is keeping a lot of things from sort of blossoming and becoming the best that they can be, and I think the best that we can be as a society. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things that I read in while I was doing my research on this topic was someone had one of the writers for one of the articles I had read. He had said we need to start looking at these people as potential and not just their past.
Yep.
Um, so beyond what they did, but instead what it's kind of, at least for me, I remember growing up, my mom always told me, everyone around you, including you, has a purpose. You're here to fulfill a purpose. So it's like whenever you go to prison, why is it that all of a sudden your purpose is taken away from you?
Mhm.
You still have that. At least like we said, in a perfect world, you would think that's how people would, see them, because they are just people, who, like you said, made mistakes. And yeah, so I think that's a powerful note. Whenever you said that, I was like, oh, I got little tears.
Oh,
That was so
yeah.
amazing. I like, and I can only imagine the impact that had on you, listening to that, like on
I
that.
will I will tell you that before I went in to listen to her talk,
Mhm.
I was very much a supporter of the death penalty.
Oh,
And
wow.
then after an hour and a half listening to her, I walked out and I was like, what am I doing? And I signed like a petition for a moratorium. I have very much, changed my
Yeah.
view about that because what she said just made so much sense. And she also had a ton of research to back it up. So I was
Yeah.
like, whoa, I mean, when you start giving me statistics and data,
Mhm.
and that is flying like against everything that I thought I knew. I was
Mhm.
like, I definitely need to reevaluate my thoughts. And she's phenomenal. You should look her up. Like,
Oh,
she's very much been an advocate, I mean, for, I want to say at least 30, 40 years. I don't know. Math is hard, but it's I had the book, and one time I saw her a second time and I had her autograph my book. And when I saw her, I started crying.
oh,
Like,
yeah, but thank you for sharing that. Like you're changing perspective because it shows that we can change our perspectives, you
you
know?
can. And I think that that's important because I know it's very uncomfortable. Well, it's very comfortable to have your belief system, right? And when that starts to get challenged, I mean, you can do one of two things, and we see this all the time. You can either ignore it and like dig your heels in more, or start, asking, am what are my belief systems based on like fact, or is it based on emotion? And
Mhm.
what is this? Do I need to be right, or do I need to be kind? And I think it's important for all of us to be more humble, because you can't be right all the time. Believe me, my wife will tell me, you want to be right all the time. And I'm trying to work on that, because if you're right, then it means somebody else has to be wrong.
Right.
And that's not a good feeling to have. So I think it's important, especially being in college, like being open to all of these sort of ideas that come your way, and question those ideas, question your own ideas, and make your own sort of informed judgment. I mean, that's what college is all about, right?
Mhm. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Today's conversation has really, showed me how vital wellness is just in general for these women incarcerated and post-incarceration. I love how we reached all the topics from mental health to the trauma to social support and their access to resources and even the changes that we can make as a society, and in our community programs and how all of this plays a role in their well-being. Thank you also for talking about the stigma, which, lots of people, I feel like as a society, we tend to avoid. But stigma and the systemic barriers is honestly what makes wellness difficult, for these women. And just the just to know, that there are people out there trying to educate these women and help them be resilient and live, positive lives outside of prison is awesome to know, but it's also eye opening because it shows we need more programs. We need more people who care, and just like we said right here at the end, that to create those opportunities for these women and for their futures, for themselves and their families, and the people around them.
Yep.
So I hope that this discussion has encouraged our listeners to see that wellness is not simply the absence of of an illness or the struggle physically or just mentally, but instead that it's the balance of opportunities, of dignity and security across all lives because all lives matter and all lives deserve an opportunity. And just, how we said, there's no reason why we should be seeing other people as trashed, but instead seeing them as potential and as more than just their past, but instead the future that they're working towards, because I am more than positive that these women, whenever they leave, they want brighter futures. They want positive outcomes in their lives. So thank you, Dr. Gehring, for sharing your expertise with us. And thank you for everybody who tuned in to Wellness Behind and Beyond Bars. Again, I'm Roxmary Mendez. Please remember to stay informed, practice empathy, and extend kindness because they're the building blocks of true wellness. Thank you guys for tuning in.